One is the social structure, class, caste, race, and gender. All of us know that women are more vulnerable than men. Poor are more affected in disasters. Uncertain castes are more affected by disasters than other castes. So these are realities. If we want to reduce vulnerability, we have to address these issues. Second is culture. Certain cultures are risk sensitive and certain cultures are not risk sensitive. Certain cultures can absorb a lot of shock, certain cultures will not be able to absorb. We see that lower castes occupy unsafe places. Poor people occupy hazardous places, particularly in the urban areas. They live near waste dumps, industrial waste. So the physical magnitude of a disaster may be the same. It impacts people differently. So this is the dominant perspective which rules now. 80% of the stakeholders in the field of disaster management think in these lines, have these dominant perspectives. Viewed as an isolated event, shock. It is an event which takes place in a particular time, in a particular space, as an isolated event. But it is not. It is a continuum. Every minute we are developing vulnerability. As we are talking, we are accumulating vulnerability. So it is happening here right now in this moment. So what we are thinking about is only the outward manifestation of the vulnerabilities which we build over a period of time. So this perspective has to change. Second is during normal times, hardly we analyze it. This ostrich syndrome is there. We don't bother about it. When we come out with the development project, we don't actually think what will be the downstream impact after 50 years or 70 years. Third is, we see it as a problem which can be fixed by using some technology or through a law and order machinery, which is not. It is a development problem. And it is seen as a temporary administrative failure. Again, how do you construct a disaster? It plays a very important role in how you will mitigate the disaster. I remember a major disaster which took place in one part of this country. So it was framed as a failure of the machinery which released the excess water. The moment you frame it like that, the solution is you suspend the chief engineer or charge sheet the deputy engineer, the problem gets solved. But it is not. The vulnerabilities in that particular city developed over a period of 300 years. The city was built wrongly. There was no urban planning, encroachments in the floodplains. So 300 years of development process took a wrong turn. So we have to address that. We should not look at it as a temporary administrative failure. Then people are seen as victims. So they are victims, they are helpless, so solutions have to come from above only. This is the dominant perspective. This is how 80% of the stakeholders think. Then if you think like that, the approach is reactive approach. There is another perspective. What is it? One is we should see it as a process of normal development. If it is not done in a proper way, if risk is not taken into account while you are planning for it, then we are continuously growing vulnerability. Second is analyze the linkages during normal time. Are we able to do that? Third is, so whenever we talk about poverty alleviation or empowering women or particular poor people, poor group, it is being thought about as one time doling out something or the other. It is not. That is not going to solve the problem. Can we change and give solutions that will change the relationship and attitudes in the society? This is very, very fundamental. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve SDG goals at all. Then people should be seen as partners. They are partners in creating the disaster, in creating the vulnerability, in accumulating the risk. It is not government which is accumulating the risk alone. People play an important role. Hence, they should also play an important role in mitigating it. They have the capabilities. They are not victims. They have their capabilities. How do you involve them in this process of mitigation? How can it be a collective process? And then decentralizing the institutions. This is very, very important. Community-based disaster management is something which we have been talking about for 20 years. But actually, it is not unfolding on the ground. We should look at it. And we should have a proactive approach, not a reactive approach. We should think about climate change impacts, extreme events, what will happen. And when we plan, it should be part of our planning process. Now we all have a blueprint for inaction. You don't want to act, there is a blueprint. If you want to act, first of all, we should discard the blueprint which we have for inaction. What are the reasons? One is, make the problem uncertain. Say whether it will happen or not. Maybe the earthquake comes after 50 years, maybe climate change will affect after 100 years. How do you plan for an event which is not at all certain? So you don't plan for it. Then there is an exactly opposite view. It is certain it will happen, we cannot avoid it, what we can do. I have seen disaster management managers talking about it, high-level officers talking about it. They say disasters cannot be avoided, but the loss can be minimized. The moment you accept that disasters cannot be avoided, you will take a reactive approach. It can be avoided because you are causing it, you can avoid it. Make solutions seem expensive. It is very costly, we cannot afford. But this is not based on any cost-benefit analysis at all. Have you done a cost-benefit analysis? Have you seen that it is expensive? Prove it? No. But the feeling that it will be expensive, we cannot afford. It is not. If you really look at it, it is not. Then make it an all or none issue. You say, in Delhi, for example, there are 40 lakh buildings. You say that all the 40 lakh buildings are vulnerable to earthquakes. None of them have been constructed according to building codes. So we have to retrofit all the 40 lakh buildings. It is not possible. How can we retrofit 40 lakh buildings? So don't do any retrofitting at all. Make it an all or none issue. Then make it feel as if policy or act is the only answer. Wait for an act. See, the act is not good. I need a policy. So unless the policy comes, we will not be able to do it. So wait for an act. Wait for a policy. Then wait for perfection. The existing system is not good, resources are not good. So wait for perfection. We have more or less become like Godot, obsessed with waiting. We don't want actually Godot to appear. So can we come out of all this and discard this blueprint? Then what should we do? First of all, we should understand risk. Do we have an understanding of risk? We do not have. We are not, first of all, a risk-sensitive society. You look at this picture tells all. We are not a risk-sensitive society. I don't need to explain this slide. Educated, urban, elite, poor, rural, both are insensitive to risk. If you look at the way people have died in this country from 2005 to 2015, I will compare natural disasters and road accidents, the so-called natural disasters. See, in all natural disasters put together, 27,420 people have died. But in road accidents only, 13,99,000 people died, which is 510 times more. And most of this is due to not wearing the helmets, not wearing the seat belts. Maybe in the couple of last 3-4 years, maybe people who are taking selfie may be included in this. This is how people die. So we are not sensitive to risk. Why we are not sensitive to risk? See, we have everyday risk. There is so much of everyday risk a person is taking in this country. He will not be bothered about long-term risk. If you say that your river will be polluted after 50 years, your grandson will suffer, who is going to pay attention? I am taking risk as on today. And there is something, a fundamental difference. If you really want to reduce vulnerability, people should understand risk. Scientists, experts, disaster managers understand risk. The way they understand risk is objective risk. You can talk about a probabilistic method or a deterministic method and all that you can talk about and talk about objective risk. But how do people understand risk? People understand risk subjectively. People, even in US, think that traveling by air is more risky than traveling by car. But all scientific studies tell that traveling by air, the probability of meeting with an accident is 1 is to 1,25,000, whereas if you travel in car, it is 1 is to 6,000. Traveling in car is more risky. But the perception is that traveling in air is more risky. So as long as people do not pursue risk the same way as we perceive, we will not be able to mitigate risk. And it is not that all risk is not desired. There is something called a desirable risk. People willingly buy sea-facing flats, lake view apartments in a flooded area, mountain view apartments in a place where earthquake and landslide is very prominent. You willingly embrace risk. And there is something called acceptable risk. Acceptable risk, it's like adding sugar in your coffee. All of us know it is not good, white sugar is not good, still we prefer it. So we accept certain amount of risk. Before we intervene, we should decide what is the acceptable level of risk we will have. Unless you set that benchmark, you will not be able to reduce vulnerability. The second portion is risk governance. Risk governance consists of reorganizing the institutions. The IPCC report, when it talks about resilience, it says it is learning and reorganizing. It's not just bouncing back. So how do you reorganize your institutions? The instruments we have, policy, techno-legal instruments, our financial systems, our human resources, and our community capacity. So we have to move from response to resilience. For that, we need to build local capacities. Local people have knowledge, capacity, resources. They have lived with disasters and they have survived disasters. So can we build their local capacity? Second is the question of regulation and the enforcement. We need regulation, but also at the same time, we need enforcement. When it comes to regulation, what is hindering us? Is it too much of regulation or too little regulation? What is it? Sometimes I used to think that we have too many regulations. If you have too many regulations, no regulation is going to be implemented. What is the right size of regulation which we require? Or is it inadequacy of laws or lack of implementation? This is very important. See, often it is felt that we don't have adequate legal backing, come out with another act or improve the existing act. But how on earth the same machinery which is incompetent to implement the existing act is going to implement a stringent act, an improved act? They are not going to do it. So is it the lack of laws or is it the lack of implementation? If one is not going to implement, then what is the use of all these laws? I have heard a young man went to a doctor. He said, I am having problem in answering nature's calls. So the doctor said, what is the problem? Are you voiding properly? Voiding is the medical term used for what children say as one bathroom. The boy said, yes, sharp 6 a.m. in the morning. So what about your bowel movement? He said, sharp at 7 a.m. in the morning. Then what is your problem? He said, I get up only at 8 a.m. in the morning. So what is the use of having regulations and laws and policies if you are not going to implement it? So implementation has to be looked at. Then this all or none approach. See, if you look at risk scientifically, 80% of the risk is concentrated in 20% of the buildings. If you can isolate them, identify them, the places where public good is involved, then we can reduce risk substantially. But we don't do that. So we should shift from all or none approach to identifying risk and reducing risk in a prioritized manner. Then we talk about extraordinary mechanisms. We create new institutional mechanisms. But they do not remain extraordinary for a long time. The tendency is one creates a new mechanism and the same government procedures will be applied, the same government staff will be deputed, then what will be new in that extraordinary mechanism? So how to really empower these extraordinary mechanisms? We have to look at it. Then this community-based disaster risk reduction. See, the word sustain comes from two Latin root words. One is sub means from below and tenere means hold. So sustain means to hold from below. Unless something is held from below, it will not sustain. So things which are imposed from top are not going to sustain. Hence building community resilience is very, very important. Hold from below. And finally, it is not always about crisis. See, if everyday governance is not improved, crisis governance cannot be improved. A person who cannot walk cannot be expected to run. A person who cannot run cannot be expected to sprint. So how do we improve everyday governance? That is very, very important. So I got a notice that my time is over. My presentation is not over. Should I continue for a couple of minutes? Okay. So in investing in resilience, then again, we should invest beyond structures. Resilience is not simply investing in structures, it is investing in people. We have to understand that. And sustainable livelihood should be created, taking into account the consequent vulnerability I spoke about. Then providing social securities for people who need it, access to education and health, human resources, and finally, research and development and knowledge generation and sharing all are required. See, generally when we talk about building resilience, the general opinion is that extra money is needed, additional money is needed. Is it really a question of additional money or reorganizing our priorities? See, this is a beautiful diagram which will tell that how disasters can create vulnerability, how it can reduce vulnerability. So we have to look at development